People find such wonderful relief. If you have back pain, shoulder, neck, hip, knee, or foot pain from exercise or just getting older, you should order the 3-week Quick Start. Discounted to only $19.95 to see if it'll work for you. I think it could. Give your body what it needs to heal itself. Go to ReliefFactor.com or call 800-500-8384.
Dell Technologies advisors listen to your small business needs so they can provide you with tailored solutions powered by Intel vPro platform. Call today at 877-ASK-DELL.
It is 8:36. Let's get an update on the morning roads. AM 560 traffic center time and Jim Telemonti.
Outbound Stevenson Expressway traffic is jammed. Harlem to County Line, where everything is blocked from County Line to 83 due to a major crash with injuries. Inbound traffic's very heavy. Lamont Road to 83 with a Gapers delay, and there's a crash at Cass in the left lane. It's 45 minutes from the Veterans Memorial Tollway to Lakeshore Drive. Inbound Kennedy, 32 minutes, so here to downtown, much quicker in the Express. Outbound, it's 22 minutes. Inbound Eisenhower, 45 minutes, 390 to downtown. Outbound 32. The Ryan runs 18 minutes from 95th to downtown. Northbound I-57, heavy Vollmer Road to I-80. On the northbound Tri-State, traffic sluggish on the ramp to the outbound Ike. I'm Jim Telemonti on AM 560, The Answer.
Jim is in our Team Hochberg Traffic Center. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. Your official Chicagoland weather forecast. Cloudy, breezy, 38 today. It's 27 right now. Next news at 9. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. Get your tickets for Biden, the first 100 days, on March 20th. Tickets are on sale now at 560theanswer.com/Biden.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, and we need to examine what happened in Texas because the left is using the power outage there and the ensuing devastation to so many families, which, it persists. Thankfully, the weather has broken and the power is being restored, but you still have 2/3 of the population under a boil water order. So what happened? Was it, as the left says, a failure of free market capitalism, a failure of reliance on the federal government? Here is what Governor Greg Abbott had to say, including about the electric rate authority that was charged with maintaining the power grid in Texas at a presser he had end of last week.
They said 5 days before the winter storm hit, the ERCOT CEO assured ERCOT, and I quote, "We're ready for the cold temperatures coming our way." He said that ERCOT had issued a notice to power plants to ensure that they were winterized properly. And ERCOT's annual winter assessment, which is designed to ensure that the state is prepared, assured the public that there would be enough power to meet peak demand this winter. ERCOT failed on each of these measures that they said they had undertaken. Texans deserve answers about why these shortfalls occurred and how they're going to be corrected, and Texans will get those answers. I'm taking responsibility for the current status of ERCOT.
So that's Abbott, who proposed a package of reforms to the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, which manages the power grid. But what exactly happened? Was it market externalities that created moral hazards with respect to energy investment in the state of Texas? Well, that's in part what Jason Isaac, who gave an extended interview over at the Epoch Times, which was very good. I'll post the whole thing, but some important snippets from it. Jason Isaac is the energy point person for the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He had this to say, and this is coming from somebody who wrote about 8-10 months ago the vulnerability the Texas power grid had to an unforeseen weather event. He was thinking it would be extreme heat during the summer, not extreme cold during February, but his point notwithstanding.
Sure, this is a culmination of bad policy that's been put in place that's been distorting the market for decades now, not only in Texas at the federal level, but has propped up one form of energy production that's unreliable over another form of energy production that is reliable. And market distorting policies at the federal level have propped up wind and solar that are intermittent, variable, unreliable sources that only provide electricity when the wind is blowing or the sun is shining. And they have competed so much that they've outpaced and outplaced and displaced natural gas, clean coal, and nuclear generation. We've seen a net loss of thermal generation, which is electricity from natural gas, coal, or nuclear, over the last 5 years, a decrease when our population, our economy have not gone in that direction. They've actually increased significantly. But we have seen a massive increase in wind and solar generation over the last 4 years that just didn't come through. Incredibly small percentage of electricity being generated on Valentine's night and early President's Day morning, Monday morning, from these unreliable sources. So that is really the precipice of how this began. It just wasn't a one-time issue. We've known this was coming for years at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I actually wrote about this and warning about this 8 months ago.
And it turns out that of the 45 gigawatts of capacity that shut down during the storm or shut down by the storm, 40% of that, 18 gigawatts, were from wind and solar. So it's not the whole story, but it's a significant part. Also, just getting Jason Isaac's response to the criticism that, well, Texas is, independent streak, and its lack of connection to the federal grid is also a mistake. This is what happens when you want to go it alone rather than lean on the federal government.
No, we're an independent state, and we like our Texas independence. And the last thing we want to do is have our grid controlled by any kind of federal regulatory agency or the federal government. We like having it independent. We like managing it, but we want to see the elimination of these market distorting policies that pick one type of winner over another type of reliable source of electricity generation. So we're already connected to the eastern grid and the western grid and even Mexico. So we do power sharing and power trading with those interchanges to the east, to the west, and to Mexico from time to time. Sometimes we're importing electricity from Mexico, and other times we're exporting it. It seems to work. The setup is good. The management was poor, and market distorting policies via subsidies have really hampered us, and this has been a long time coming.
And don't you think, the media wants Texas to look bad in hopes of flipping them blue, to become a Democratic state?
For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Robert Bryce, visiting fellow at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity. He's the host of the Power Hungry podcast and author of A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. He's also the writer of the documentary Juice, How Electricity Explains the World. Robert Bryce, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Glad to be with you, Dan.
What is your assessment of what fellow egghead Jason Isaac had to say about what happened in Texas?
Egghead? I thought you were going to say handsome guy, smart guy.
Well, I say that with all love, yes.
Okay. Well, I think that some of the things that Jason is saying are absolutely right, and that I think that the key issues here are that the structure in ERCOT didn't favor resilience and surplus. It actually favored shortages. That it was an energy-only market, and the renewable industry loved that because they didn't have to provide, in the market structure, they didn't have to provide power when power was dear. In other words, they didn't have to deliver kilowatts, megawatts, gigawatts when demand was high. They could provide that when demand was low. So by being in that kind of market, it skewed the market toward renewables in a way, and the structure of the market itself did. But I want to back out for just a minute because I think the broader story, and it's the piece that I wrote in Forbes a week ago, and I published it exactly 7 days ago right after we lost power in our house here in Central Austin. We were without electricity for 45 very cold hours. But this move to electrify everything is the linchpin of the climate activists' plan for the future. They want to put all of our transportation load, industrial load, residential load, everything onto the electric grid. Well, it's a recipe for disaster. It's putting all of our energy eggs in one basket, and we've already seen how fragile the electric grid is. So the idea that we should quit using natural gas directly in our homes and rely solely on electricity, that is, I think, the biggest issue at hand and one that we ignore at our peril.
Well, do you know when the last time the electric grid was updated?
Well, the electric grid, that's one of the interesting things about this is the idea, the grid. Well, the electric grid itself is an incredibly complex machine. This is the largest machine in the world. We have, in the United States, 3,000 different electricity providers. We have the publicly owned power utilities. We have the cooperatives. We have the investor-owned utilities like Exelon. But making all of this work together is an incredibly delicate dance, and the grid is always being upgraded. When I plug in my computer, I'm connecting to the grid. So all this machinery, this is the mother network, and that's the other key point here is that this is the network upon which all modern networks depend. And we tamper with and ignore its fragility and its resilience at our peril.
And the media talking about this is like the media talking about guns. I mean, they don't even bother to understand what they're trying to communicate. So you hear people conflating, natural gas froze. And it's not natural gas. No, natural gas didn't freeze. The gas didn't freeze, but some of the equipment that delivers the natural gas did. And so there were also questions about the necessary maintenance and winterization efforts in Texas with respect to its grid.
Well, that's absolutely true. And one of the other things that is and 2 points. One is natural gas now in the United States is providing about 40% of all the electricity that's generated in this country. It was the hero during the Texas blackouts. Without natural gas, the U.S. grid would have the Texas grid would have collapsed. So it's time for us to understand that natural gas is a critical fuel for the United States. There's just no getting around it. A lot of people like to hate hydrocarbons, and now they're full-on efforts to ban natural gas. But the idea that we should shut down our entire natural gas grid, it's the envy of the world. And it's a critical fuel and needs to be understood as a piece of our critical infrastructure. One other point that I think deserves a lot of attention as well, and you're in Chicago, correct? You're in Illinois?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, Exelon is getting ready to close 2 nuclear reactors in Illinois. The lesson from the big takeaway lesson, perhaps more than any other from Texas and the Texas blackouts, is do not close your nuclear plants. They are critical to the stability of your electric grid. We can talk about what forms of generation performed well, which ones didn't. There's no doubt that's clear that the nuclear reactors, 4 of them in Texas, at Comanche Peak and in South Texas Project, produced and performed better than any other form of generation. Without those, Texas grid would have really been in the hurt locker.
Well, so, this is the idea of redundancy, which was lacking.
Well, I think it's redundancy, but I prefer to use the word resilience. And
okay.
So much of the discussion in Texas and elsewhere has been on the focus and the spending and the transmission capacity has been focused on decarbonization of the grid and not nearly enough on resilience. And the reality is, Texas came very close to a complete system blackout. I mean, there were moments there. It's been reported a couple different places that the system, the entire Texas grid, was within a few minutes of shutting down entirely. Well, that would have been catastrophic failure. And so all this focus on decarbonization, what about resilience? This is the most important network in society, and it's just been kind of accepted, it's going to work out. Well, no, it needs attention and careful attention.
And then what about those who signed up for the variable rate utility plans who got electric bills of $16,000?
I know, and some of this, again, is Amy, it's a great point, and this has been this whole line of, wind and solar are cheaper. Well, until they aren't, and that's what we've seen is that during these periods of extreme weather, the prices skyrocket, and that was a function of the market in which all these electricity producers were participating. They were rewarding scarcity, which seems like the absolute wrong approach if you want abundant, reliable electricity.
Right, and of course, one of the great ironies is that the Biden team comes to the rescue with what? Diesel generators. So they come to the rescue with oil. And this goes to, and this is, it's hard because it requires people to follow a continuum of look at decisions that were made and then ultimately the consequences in a moment. But this is what you're getting at and what Jason Isaac was getting at. You create these externalities. You set up perverse incentives. So, for example, the subsidies that were allowing wind and solar operators to essentially pay providers to use their power sources as compared to natural gas, and you change the distribution that you're relying on in terms of power source, and then when you have a catastrophic weather event, you could have something catastrophic with the power grid. But sort of those connections to policies at the front end and consequences at the back end are sometimes hard to convey.
Well, I think that's right, Dan. And, the oldest maxim in politics is follow the money. Okay, well, follow the money. Where did all the investment in Texas go? And I think this follows somewhat on Jason Isaac's point and also some points that Alex Epstein has made, as well as Meredith Angwin, who's the author of a terrific book called Shorting the Grid, who really was prescient in looking at some of these issues. Follow the money. Where was all the investment in Texas? Well, one was the CREZ lines, these competitive resource enterprise zones. All Texas ratepayers paid for the cost of those transmission lines, which were finished, I guess, in 2013, at a cost of many billions of dollars. Well, so ratepayers are effectively directly subsidizing transmission for this one form of energy. Well, but what did we get in return? It wasn't reliable power, which is the key here.
Robert Bryce, visiting fellow at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, host of the Power Hungry podcast, author of A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations, and writer of the documentary Juice, How Electricity Explains the World. Robert, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks a million, Dan.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
You're invited to the 2021 Auto Show going on now at Joe Cotton Ford in Carroll Stream. It's the perfect time to get into a new vehicle from the exciting 21 Ford lineup.